Welcome to the Dental Brief, the world's direct, right-to-the-point podcast produced to get you the information you need to learn and grow your practice. To learn more about our guests and find links to information discussed on our show, visit our website, dentalbrief.com. On to today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Dental Brief, the fastest podcast on the internet today. Michael Dinsio is our guest today. Michael, say hello.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey, I'm excited to have you here. You host a podcast yourself. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. It's called Dental Uncensored, and I'll let you tell us more about that. But kind of give us your background a little bit, Michael, and how you got in the dental industry and kind of what your area of expertise is.
Yeah, I'll keep this short. I know people tend to drag their bios out long, but my background came from financing. I was a B of A banker. I like to say I'm a recovering banker because that's a rough life, and hats off to all those bankers out there. But 6 to 8 years in that banking industry, I touched a lot of startups, a lot of acquisitions, just a lot of business models and whatnot. And then kind of transitioned that to consulting, got burned out on banking and that transactional relationship. And so got into consulting and my focus was really to focus on helping doctors get into ownership the right way. Think about all those things that you need to do before that happens, whether it was a startup or an acquisition. So yeah, that's what I'm doing today at Next Level.
So I have to imagine on the banking side, dealing in those two areas, especially even startups, you probably saw from a financial point of view some of the big problems and risk that practice seemed to kind of fall into. Talk about those problems a little bit that you saw and how that kind of helped you transition into consulting. Yeah,
it's, for startups, a little different challenges than acquisitions. Startups they're really worried about that cash flow, which is why no one really wants to do a startup, but it's the sexy part of it. It's brand new floors, brand new equipment, brand new ceilings. It's the location that they got to choose, the demographics that they wanted. So it's like the perfect thing, but then the cash flow is not there, right? And then the acquisition doctor, of course, is really attracted to the cash flow, assuming that it's there. There's a lot of bad practices out there that don't have a lot of cash flow. But if it does have good cash flow, that's what they're attracted to. But then they have beat up equipment and they have to inherit an older team, maybe, a front office gal that's just been kind of hanging out for 20 years and set in her ways. So, and all of those challenges. And so I think that's the biggest challenge with these young docs is which direction they go.
So I know a big part of what you do is I know you work in a lot of areas, but you do focus in on transitions and startups, correct? It was a big area of focus for you.
Yeah, so we do focus on that, and then what we found was they needed some help post-close or post-open as well. So we built a team of consultants that help those folks kind of put stability around that transition. But yeah, I would say that is our biggest value add at Next Level.
So when someone knows they potentially think they may want to do a startup, how soon should they start to plan for that? What are some things that they should start to think about? And how can they work towards putting themselves in a position, or I should say on a path towards success in that process?
Well, to me, there's two things. There's two ways answering that question. Mentally preparing yourself and then actually preparing yourself as you go into the startup. So mentally, as an associate, I really want people to pay attention to what they're doing at the practice that they're working as an associate, picking up those good habits, asking a lot of questions, understanding the front office stuff, understanding the business, and then even more importantly, the clinical stuff. What do you want to do and what don't you want to do? What's going to differentiate you? And then, of course, noting things that don't work or how you don't want to do those things that maybe some of the corporate dentists are doing or corporate offices are doing. And so mentally, that's really where you want to get into it. Financially, of course, saving enough money and getting yourself prepared financially is another big piece before you take on that endeavor. Having a checking account or a mattress full of cash is always a more comforting thing when you go into a startup, right?
Sure.
So those things, obviously, I'm thinking of, and then going into the startup itself, you know, big picture, you do want to think about where you want to live. You want to think about what demographics you want to serve, and so that's really where it starts, right? So, but yeah, it's that whole process as far as getting prepared.
So in the startup area and the transition, there's a lot of people that work, a lot of experts who work and help people in that process, from real estate to banking, as you mentioned before, to people who specialize in build out, to credentialing, to all of these different areas. And of course, there's a benefit for those experts and those consultants to help practices actually open. And maybe some of the times a practice or a dentist isn't quite ready to open a practice. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Like people thinking it was something then it wasn't. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean more like there's a lot of people in the industry that want to see someone open a practice because there's a benefit for them, but the practice owner themselves may not be ready at that time. Like they're not mentally prepared for it. They're not emotionally prepared for it. They're not professionally prepared for it. I see that happen from time to time. Have you seen that yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. So let's talk about red flags. What are some telltale signs that someone is not ready to open a practice right now? Let's even say they've got the money saved up, their student loan debt is eliminated, or it's very low. What are a couple of things that you say, well, wait a minute, we have to work on this issue first before we can start to proceed and look at doing a startup?
Yeah, like business isn't really one of those things, even though I want you to be interested in business. You got a lot of advisors, a lot of people that can kind of help you with the CPA, consultants, and all that stuff. You didn't get that training in school. So business, you would naturally think maybe that's where we're heading with this conversation. But to me, I think it's the clinical aspect and it's the leadership aspect in my mind. If someone is doubting their clinical skills, they might not want to do a startup, right? Because they're just going to get themselves in a lot of situations. They might have to refer a lot of stuff out that they normally might be able to keep in. And so, you know, clinically, I would want you to be super confident and ready to go and be prepared to see, you know, who you want to see as far as clinical goes, clinical philosophy. The other part of that, would be the leadership part, like I said. So if you're not prepared to lead a team into the direction and the vision that you're ready to take your practice, don't do it. If you're not super clear about your vision in general, don't do it. I see a lot of doctors just kind of walking through those steps. To you said, they find those experts in the industry and those experts drive them in that direction. And if they're not super clear about their vision, the expert ends up taking on their vision for them. And that's not what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Or sometimes maybe even creates the vision for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly right. I was just working on a business plan and I found myself like coming up with somebody's business plan for them. And I'm like, you know, I am your consultant. I can give you a lot of ideas. I've seen a lot of business models, but what do you want to do? Is this something that you've thought about that you'd like or don't like? So yeah, I think those are the red flags for sure. And even on the acquisition side, I just ran into that the other day where he really wanted to buy, he now owns. And it was just some of the little things that he said during the buyer process that maybe I should have keyed in on sooner, but he was really worried about maybe some of his crown creps and, just some of his clinical skills. And now we're in the practice. He told me he could do all the clinical work. And now we're finding that he's referring a lot out. So again, startups, acquisitions, they both have their concerns.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to both. I think everybody knows that, but I just think, and what do we love about what you bring to the table in the dental community is helping people understand what those pros and cons are, especially for them as an individual, right? Because I know personality types for some people, what is a pro may actually be a con and vice versa. So let's talk about this, Michael. If somebody knows they either want to acquire a practice in the future or they want to do a startup, eventually they want to own a business, right? When's a good time for that person to start talking to someone like you to really help them kind of understand the nuances, what it takes challenges, and of course, the rewards for facing those challenges. When's a good time for them to reach out to someone like you?
Yeah, someone like me, I would say that's a loaded question. The way I structured my pricing model, I give my clients an option to, retain me and start asking me questions as early as they want, and it's not super scary, and they're not signing a huge contract. I think with a lot of consultants, they might be signing some bigger contracts, and they might not be ready to commit to that. And
Sure.
so signing the dotted line and getting into a contract could be super scary. So I've tried to come up with a program where someone can hire me if they're really early on in the process, get their ideas on paper, get them thinking about these things that we're talking about, and then they just kind of take it at their own pace. And there isn't that pressure that we're talking about. So I guess as early as someone's thinking, I want to own a practice.
Yeah. So to vet someone to help them with this, I know your area of expertise. If somebody is wanting to vet an expert, what are some questions they should ask? What should they look for besides the obvious of checking references and reviews and that sort of thing? What advice would you give there?
Of course, call references, but think about references, right? Is they're only going to give you names of people that are raving fans. So,
Sure.
so are they really references? But big picture, I would ask them what is their background, what's their experience. If they're going to help you do a transition, how many transitions have they touched in field? Also, who's their circle, who's their influence? I always say one of my biggest strengths to my clients is who I know and my friends, meaning attorneys, CPAs. I can call these people and ask them questions. And guess what? That attorney's not going to send them a bill because me and that attorney are friends. So who's their influences? Who do they know? And really what their background is and how many times have they done it? And then I'll throw on one last thing is what's their systems, right? I would say that some people in our world of consulting is you are buying what's in their head, but sometimes if there isn't a system of organization and a process, a checklist, that kind of thing, that can frustrate docs too, because they do want to check things off a list. They are analytical and they do want to have a process to things. And so, what is that process and how do you walk me through this? Lastly, that fee, how are you getting paid? Is it going to be a carrot of closing the deal, or is it going to be paid by your time up front? And there could be two things with that, right? If it's paid at the end and it's that carrot for the consultant, then are they driving you to the close because they want that carrot, or are you paying them for their time and the process through it and not to the close, if that makes sense? So
that makes a ton of sense. Where's their incentive, right?
Yeah,
it really does. Michael, tell me a little bit about, and we're time's moving fast, as you know, but tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast started out as just kind of something we wanted to do. It originally was going to be a live event, similar to like a breakaway, where we bring people in and we're going to educate everybody about how to do a startup. Then COVID happened, and we're like, well, that's not going to work. Why don't we do a podcast? And so I teamed up with a guy named John Bertagni. He and I run the show. John's experience is much different than my experience. He was a equipment rep. He owned 8 practices. He started a construction kind of pseudo firm. And then, of course, my side was the banking and consulting. And so together, we're bringing all of our experience, and we're bringing in folks that are going to, we're basically walking a startup from start to finish, from vision to demographics to real estate and all the way through the process. So it's going to be episode 1 through 25. And by the end of it, it's kind of everybody that you need to talk to and think about. But the name Uncensored truly is uncensored. We're trying to be pretty uncensored about it. So,
sure. No, that's great. Being candid is awesome, and it's helpful. It's useful. It's one thing that we love here, and we've loved having you on today. I want to have you come back on. Give us your website URL one more time.
Yeah. The consulting side, it's nxlevelconsultants.com. And then for the podcast, it's dentaluncensored.com. Yeah.
Yeah, I highly encourage our guest to check out Michael's podcast for sure. You got to check it out. Check out the website, ton of information on there. I found a bunch of useful information on there myself. Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Did you know you can weigh in on today's topic on Facebook? Search The Dental Brief on Facebook or visit our website, dentalbrief.com, and just follow the link. We look forward to having you join us again on another episode of The Dental Brief.